Hello, I'm Dr. Ron Eaglin coming to you from Daytona State College, and this is CEN 3722, Human-Computer Interaction. And today's topic in our HCI is attention and memory. So let's look at what we're going to learn today. Well, you need to have an understanding of how human attention and memory play in the role of HCI. How do we have our attention focused and how, oh wait, what are you talking, okay. Oh, distractions, yes, distractions, things that happen that might pull you away from what you're doing and how the HCI designer has to be able to take that into account. You also need to understand a little bit about the limitations of the individual users and how they can remember things and how to present information in such a way that it doesn't bump up against those limitations. So let's talk a little bit about attention. Now, most systems that you're going to design and that you've seen and used already take into account just the basics of how to deal with attention by presenting what you need to do in a structured manner, by grouping things in like areas, such as in a menu, you expect certain things to be in certain areas. That's all things that help you with the attention on the system. But the bottom line of attention is going to be that it is not always focused. It would be nice to assume that your users walk into a computer system, start using it, and they never do anything else. But that is not the reality. We are always going to be dealing with the concept of divided attention. So, divided attention. You're using a system, this has happened to you, the phone rings, you pick it up, somebody walks into your office, you have to go to the bathroom, and then you've got to come back and you've got to pick up where you left off. Well, that's not the user's responsibility, that's the designer's responsibility to make sure that systems actually are able to handle this, that we actually have the aids associated with your system that allow the user to pick up where they left off and just make the assumption that they forgot everything that they were doing when they left. It's going to remind you, this is where you are, this is what you need to do. Now, how do you do that? Well, there's all sorts of different ways to do that, and really it's just in simple organization by using spatial cues and temporal cues and just simple reminders. So what do we mean by a spatial cue? Well, if you look at example A, that's kind of hard to read. But if you look at example B, that's pretty easy to read. That's a simple example of a spatial cue, just the way that you present the information on screen. Temporal cues can be the same thing. Red, yellow, green. Now, you should know that these are actually social contextual issues. We think of red as being, uh-oh, need to take care of it. Yellow, okay, might be a problem. Green, okay, green light, we're all good. Hey, same thing that you do when you're driving an automobile. You know what those lights mean, okay? Same thing in temporal cues. Overdue, red, got plenty of time, green. Now, if something flashes or moves or has exclamation marks or has an audio warning, that's probably something that's trying to get your attention. And when you're designing, you can use these types of things to get that attention of the user. So what we want to do is change from warning to warning. Okay, which one grabs your attention faster? The word or the flashing word? Okay, it's just part of what you're going to have to use to get that attention. Don't go crazy with this. Okay? If it's important, it's good enough to put a flash in, but if it's not that important, you don't need to do it. Movement. Movement also grabs attention. We are pre-programmed to have to focus on something that we see moving. It was part of our survival of our species. Guess what? You can use that to your adventure. You can use that to your advantage. Now, the urgent message. Well, we know this very well. You've all used a computer system where, bing, it pops up and there's the screen and you need to do something because it's saying, oh, by the way, you forgot to save your file after, and you're trying to close the program. Do you want to lose everything you just did? Well, in those cases, that makes a lot of sense because The user probably doesn't want to lose everything. The user has to respond to this type of message. So you're forcing the user into a response, but you're also getting that attention of that user with an alert. So you've already seen a whole lot of different examples of how to get that attention. What if you just don't need a tremendous amount of attention, but it needs to be available to the user when they want it? Well, that's the good old information bar, something where that information is there. It's relatively prominent because it's in a different color or in a different design than the rest of the things around it, but it's not in their face, flashing or doing big warning stuff, okay? You always want to give help to the users. And the help and assistance is usually something that most users today will know that menu item over there to the right that says help is what's going to give them help. But contextual help is also good. That question mark next to something on the screen that they know that if they click on it, it's going to give them some sort of help. So we've got this concept of attention, and we understand that we need different levels of attention in your design for different things that you're doing. Well, let's look at a little bit more about the individual users. And let's talk about something called automatic processing. We do automatic processing all the time. You probably do not know that while these slides are showing on this presentation, your brain is automatically reading them. You really don't even have a choice. When you see text in front of you, your brain automatically processes it. We've learned to do that. We know how to walk and chew gum at the same time, hopefully. Some of us like to walk and read. That is all automated processing. Now, these things almost everybody does as automatic processing, but you can learn to do automatic processing with many things. Top-level musicians, okay, they're not sitting there with this attention trying to figure out how to hit the correct notes, unless they're just reading the music and trying to do it that way, which is focused attention. But many musicians will simply play and it becomes an automated processing. Okay, juggling. Very good jugglers, not putting a ton of thought into it. The balls simply move and it's all automated, which is a good thing because what it allows them to do is other things while the automated processing is going on. And you can actually tell when people have that automated processing. If you're talking to somebody who's juggling and they can't talk back to you, it is not an automated process. If you're talking to somebody who's playing guitar, they can turn and talk to you while they're playing guitar and just keep going. It's become an automated process. And we can learn automated processes. Okay, now, let's try something here, because in an automated process, everything should have this relatively cognitively make sense. So here I've got a number of words that are in different colors. Well, the words are the colors. If the words and the colors match, it's relatively straightforward. You don't have to divide your attention between what you see as a color and what you see as a word. So if you were to read the first column, which just and say, just tell me the colors, you'd be going black, green, red, blue. It all becomes relatively automated. But when you go to the next column, it's no longer automated because the word and the colors don't match. So you actually have to spend a split second more in figuring out how to say the color or read the word. Now, we have developed models of how memory works. And one of the memory models is what we call the multi-store model. You get input and stimuli, something comes, somebody talks to you, you see things, and it goes into your working memory, that little bit of memory that just can deal with what's happening around you right now. Now, some of this is going to get committed into long-term memory, stuff that you're going to be able to remember later. Some of it's going to be flushed. Your body's going to say, your mind's going to say, I don't need that anymore. Okay, it can go away. By repetition, we can convert many things from your short-term memory into your long-term memory. Okay, as a designer, this is something that you need to use. But the biggest thing about this is that your working memory, that short-term memory, doesn't have a tremendous amount of capacity. Your long-term memory has incredible capacity. Okay, you can probably remember the words to hundreds of different songs, or you remember the directions of how to get to hundreds of different places. All that has been committed to your long-term memory, but it got committed from your short-term memory to your long-term memory. So understanding that the working memory, that short-term memory that humans have is limited, is going to make a big difference in how you design systems. So what's our magic number? Well, most people can hold 7 pieces of memory, and we're going to call those 7 things chunks. The reason for the word chunks is it can be a picture, it can be a word, it can be a sound, it can be a smell. Those are all chunks. Remember, you're getting input from all sorts of different types of stimuli, and you've got more than one sense. So let's look at this concept of chunking. First, let's look at this number. If you were to look at this number for 3 seconds and close your eyes and try to memorize it, you might have some trouble, unless you spotted the pattern. If you spot the pattern, what has happened there is all of that had to be broken up into individual chunks of memory. But once you make this into a pattern, all you're going to remember is the one chunk, which is the pattern. 3002, 2002, the number on the left went down by 1, and it was 002. It now became from a lot of chunks of memory to a simple pattern and then the beginning of the pattern. So we've chunked it. And your mind sometimes automatically chunks things. So another one, very simple one, take these words and try to memorize each of the individual words. Well, they all become individual chunks of information because there's no relationship between them in the way that I presented them. However, if you memorize them as a phrase, the phrase becomes a single chunk of information, and your learned information about how the words should go together makes sense. That's also the way that you can remember the words to lots of songs, because you're memorizing patterns. Welcome, how are you today? That becomes one chunk of information because your mind knows this all goes together well. Different numbers of chunks of information. Now, let's go back to something that we had discussed before, which is the concept between recognition and recall. So in the concept of, and this is something that you will use in design, in the concept of recall, you are going to have to pull something out of your long-term memory, bring it forward, and then use it. If it's in working memory, you also can pull it out of working memory. Now, recognition is much, much easier for humans. To say, there is a chair. I know what a chair is, I understand it, I can see it. But to recall that chair and all the pieces and parts of that chair from memory, there's going to be gaps of the information. You don't want to make your users recall, you want to help them recognize. Also, know thy user, remember good old know thy user. The familiarity of different things to that user are going to make a big difference on how are they able to recall or remember or even recognize. But in this case, we're going to really look at recall. So if I said, he has a predilection towards autonomous artistic creation, you've probably already forgotten what I just said, because I'm not using words that may be familiar words with your vocabulary. That's the concept of familiarity. You are given things that are typically unfamiliar, and your mind has a much harder time committing those even to working memory. Whereas if I say, he likes to create things on his own, you're probably going to remember that. In fact, you'll probably remember that later today. He likes to create things on his own. But close your eyes and try to remember that first phrase that I just said. He has a predilection towards autonomous artistic creation. You're probably not going to remember that one. So this all has a big effect on how you design systems for users to use. And if you're designing a system, you want to have everything as much as possible come from recognition. You want them to have meaning in the context of the users and in the context of those particular users. So For example, just simple things. Back in the old days, or actually in the days of now with Linux, which is a command line language, knowing what cat and grep and lint and what do those mean? Well, some of those are just abbreviations of words that you know. But to me, saying to copy something makes more sense than CP, because CP can have other meanings. I know what copy means. If I want to copy something, I use the word copy. Okay, we do this. But what we also try to do is develop metaphors, which we're going to talk about later, of how just different common tasks you use in an user interface are going to be presented. So we all are probably familiar with the concept of cut, copy, paste. But you know what? The words cut, copy, and paste take up a lot of space on a computer screen. So we oftentimes don't want to have to use the entire word. So we want to associate them with something else, like cut, pair of scissors. Copy, well, you got a copy. Paste, you got the little clipboard piece that's right there. And we use icons to present those. The other advantage of icons is, well, when you're designing, you may have to be designing for the concept of multilingual, which means that you're changing languages. But if the icons span across all different types of languages, it makes your system much easier. So, in summary, what have we actually done here? Well, what I want you to understand from this is there are limitations in the concept of attention and memory. Attention, you must always design for the concept of not having the full attention of your audience. It will be divided. They will have to leave and come back. You have to provide the visual, spatial, temporal, or other cues so that they can do those things. You also need to understand the concept of chunking. Okay, how can I take pieces of information and make them from being lots of pieces of information that a user has to remember in short-term memory to just a few? Because you're going to have a much more successful system, and users are going to like it a lot more if you don't make them memorize a lot of things. And lastly, the concept of recognition versus recall. Understanding that recall is difficult for most users, whereas recognition is relatively easy. So if you can provide those cues to move from the concept of having to recall to the concept of just being able to recognize, again, the user is going to have a much more satisfying experience when they use your system. So as we move forward, we're going to go into even more depth in some of these types of things. But right now, this is attention and memory, and I hope you remember what we've taught you. Thank you very much. Over and out.